So I hope everybody can hear us. Can you see me on the screen now? So log into your Zoom account. Can you see me? You can see me? Yeah. And I think you can all hear me. So Ella, who's Ella? You're not Ella, right? Okay, so that's one. What about Anna? I think who's the fourth person in the class? Is it Anais? And hi, Ella. And Anais, yes, okay. So thank you for coming to class today. And I apologize that we're doing it through the computers because it's a bit of a challenge to do it off the classroom. I'm not familiar with this classroom computer. It's the first time I've been here. So today we have a special format, and it's kind of interesting because we have two people in class and two people who are attending virtually. And so Sarah and Anais, and we have one more person who has to sign in. Is who's the fourth person? Have you signed in yet?
No, I cannot find the Wi-Fi that I did.
Okay, well, it's yeah, it's at the top of the of your computer. You can click on the Wi-Fi button there.
Yeah, but I cannot access it.
Why?
Because of the diagnosis. Sometimes you said it to me.
Can you fix that? Are you able to access that? Okay. Okay. So is everybody logged on? And so that we can do this, because I don't know what it's telling me here. I have to restart this format again at some other point on the computer. So I just want to make sure that everybody's logged in. Everybody's logged in?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, we have 4 people. Okay. So this is first face-to-face meeting. So, and this is the first time I've got to see at least 2 of you. So, of course, I've told you a bit about who I am. You know, my background, having worked at the Catholic University of Korea since 2009. So this is, I guess, my 13th year. And then prior to coming here, I was at the American University in Bulgaria. And the American University in Bulgaria was started in the early 1990s, in 1991, at the same time that the first Balkans wars were starting. Well, I should say the first Balkan wars in the 1990s. And the conflict in Ukraine that's going on now between Russia and Ukraine has, for me, lots of parallels, or what do you call it when you deja vu when you experience something that's similar, like something that happened in the past. As I listen to the news reports about, for example, ceasefires that are being negotiated in Ukraine, and then the ceasefires being violated and not being followed. This all reminds me of events that happened 25, 30 years ago in Bosnia during the Bosnian War. Ceasefires, humanitarian corridors, trying to make it safer, less dangerous for civilians to flee, and then failing because of the failure to make sure that the ceasefire was actually implemented because of failures by local commanders to communicate effectively. It's chaos. It's all chaos, chaotic violence. And one of the differences between Bosnia and Macedonia is that, of course, Bosnia and Ukraine is that, of course, Ukraine is 10 times the size of Bosnia. And so we're seeing magnitudes more suffering involving magnitudes more people than we saw in Bosnia 30 years ago. But before I go further lamenting the failure of Europe to maintain peace within Europe, despite the European Union and European integration, I think maybe it's a good time for us to to introduce ourselves a little bit better. So we have in class today, we have Sarah.
Yes.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
And Ella? Oh, you're Katya, Gloria.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sarah, are you from which university in Belgium or is it France? Which university are you from?
No, I'm from Mexico.
Mexico, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm from the United States. Which university in Mexico?
Anahuac.
Yeah, what state is it in Mexico?
Querétaro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have we had other students from that university here at Catholic University of Korea? Because I've had other Mexican students and I can't remember where they were from. I had a Mexican student a few years ago in a European policy meeting class, not this class. And I think we've had other Mexican students, but I can't remember. You know, I know they come from different universities in Mexico. And Gloria, where are you from?
From Belgium.
Belgium, okay. And I'm kind of curious because Europe is a land of migration and refugees. Now that we are seeing big movement of refugees from Ukraine now into the biggest refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War. Are you background? Has your family always been in Belgium, or is there history before coming to Belgium?
No, I'm from Sardinia.
Oh yeah, really?
Yeah.
Oh, which part of Sardinia?
Oyena.
Is that the?
The capital.
Oh, fascinating, fascinating. You know, because I think I might have mentioned, I'm really interested in the topic of nationalism.
Yeah.
And of course, Catalan and Catalonia nationalism is much in the news, or had been prior to the pandemic, right? And of course, what was his name? Who's the man who fled Catalonia and went to Brussels? He was a member of the European Parliament. Was he the prime minister of the Catalan government? And then he declared independence, and then he fled, and then he went to Sardinia. And he went to Sardinia. I knew about Sardinia because I attended in 2008 a conference in Barcelona, and in Catalonia, Catalonia, I guess, Catalonia, and I did a little reading on gotta make sure. Sorry, I did a little reading on Catalonia. I think it's on Catalonia. Of course, Catalan patriots will remind anyone of this, right? That Catalonia, because the one that can't see me, Catalonia in the Middle Ages was an imperial power. They conquered Athens, and they conquered part of Sardinia. And so there's an area in northern Sardinia where they speak a Catalan dialect. And this man fled there. Was it in Pujol? Puigdemont. Yeah. He could still be there for a minute, but he was. So there's a region in Sardinia where they speak a language that's related. It's part of Catalan language. So yeah, it's a fascinating case. It's a fascinating case. Wow, that's excellent. There's so many. Okay, one of the chapters in the textbook that you're going to read is about Spain. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I think in the introduction in class, each chapter in the book is written by a college professor or a couple of college professors, and they're given a task. They're told, please write a chapter on the Europeanization of Spain. And each professor takes that task on their own decision how to do it. So as I recall the chapter on Spain, which I read very closely, there's not much discussion at all about Catalan identity. There is some reference about how Catalonia is a very active and strong province or within the Spanish federal system. But that's pretty much the extent of which there's a reference to Catalonia and the specific issues related to Catalonia. But it's definitely a fascinating case. And But I want to make sure I don't go too far off the topics that we're supposed to cover this week, because we're already supposed to be on chapter 2 of the text form. And so, again, let me get reorganized here. And the reason I mentioned, I always think about that conference I was at in Barcelona, because it was an academic conference of the International Society for Political Psychology. And it was a conference about peace building and conflict resolution and various mechanisms. Like, for example, establishing Truth and Reconciliation Commission, like was established in 1990s in South Africa to examine the history of apartheid and the crimes that were done there, and investigating criminal activity during civil wars, like in Guatemala or in El Salvador, or international courts and their function in Cambodia. And so, because I'm kind of a nerd, because Barcelona is a beautiful city, so, but during lunchtime at this 3-day conference, every lunchtime I went to the big meetings where everybody would come together, and a guest from Spain a guest professor from Spain would make a presentation during the lunch break. And so I attended 3 of these, they're called plenary sessions involving everybody was invited and listened to this guest speaker, and the next day, the next guest speaker, and the next day, the next guest speaker, when everybody would come together on this conference. Remember, the theme of this conference is peace and reconciliation and peace building. And so these professors were talking about what the United Nations was doing and what some other organization was doing. And then I was in my apartment in Barcelona, getting ready to getting up very early to go to the airport. And there was on the television, on the news, I was watching early after midnight, report about a Truth and Investigation Commission for the war crimes and the atrocities that happened in Franco during the Civil War. That had just been passed by was it the Sanchez socialist government? This is 14 years ago. It's a long time ago, 14 years ago. And how they're investigating, and they're excavating the mass graves, and they're going to investigate all of this in the sky and try to delve into the history of what happened, because until this time in Spain, people did not talk about this. And I realized at this conference, at the same time, when I attended this conference, these 3 professors who were guests talked about what they were doing in Cambodia, what they were doing in South Africa, what they were doing in Central America in terms of peace and reconciliation and creating laws to investigate. And none of them, not one of them, described or referenced what was going on in Spain at that very time. None of them mentioned it. None of them referred to it. I didn't know from their talks. And of course, I was listening to the translation. So what does that, I always wondered, what does that tell me? And what it tells me is that they didn't describe it because they were afraid to talk about it.
Yeah, there are a lot of corruption. And in Italy, obviously, with what is it? That the one who possesses all the television.
Oh, Berlusconi, yeah.
Yeah. And in Spain also, because of the history, and in Sardinia and Sicily with Camorra.
Yeah.
A lot of corruption.
So yeah, maybe people are afraid that something bad would happen to them. And then this investigation commission began its work, and then the Socialist Party lost control of the government. And the Conservative Party, the Popular Party, they cut all funding for more funding for this investigation body to investigate and describe and write down and investigate what happened in the 1930s during the Civil War. It stopped. And it did not restart until 2 or 3 years ago, when the Socialist Party came back into power. So only now, well, before the pandemic, they were beginning to investigate it again. They were starting to provide financing money that the investigation committee would need to investigate what happened during the Spanish Civil War. But they give us the sense of power and fear that even 80 years after the Spanish Civil War, they feel they have to be careful. And I even have a personal connection to it. My grandfather's brother was one of Mussolini's soldiers that the fascist regime in Italy sent to fight on the side of Franco during the war. One of the 60,000 Italian soldiers that Mussolini sent to Spain to help the Franco side win in that war. And so that's the context for understanding or approaching each of the chapters in the book. And that's not really talked much about at all in the book. It's our job to talk about it here. Remember, the European Union is meant to be a peace strategy for Europe. It's many other things, but ultimately it's supposed to bring peace to Europe. Europe that has a terrible, terrible history, the 1930s Civil War, World War II, and wars that are continuing now in Ukraine, which is in the center of Europe. So we have to analyze the European Union and particularly analyze, I think, the impact of the Europeanization in the European Union on the nationalism of the member states. Nationalism, I'm not saying nationalism is a bad thing. Nationalism, I'm not describing nationalism as an ideology. It's not an ideology. Nationalism is a kind of behavior that people show when they have an intense self-identification with a big, large community of people. And that big, large community of people, we call their nation. In my case, if I'm your typical American, the American nation. In China, the typical Chinese person is probably a Chinese nationalist. I'm probably an American nationalist. My grandfather in Italy was an Italian nationalist. Many people who live in Barcelona and Catalonia in Spain are both Catalan and Spanish. Some are more Catalan, intense self-identifiers, than Spanish self-identifiers. You remember, people have more than one identity. We have, each of us, more than one strong emotional self-identity. I already mentioned I'm probably, how would you describe me? We talked about this in discussing nationalism. How would you describe Professor me, Professor? How would you describe it? First thing that comes to your mind.
Like personality or?
No, just who is identified. If you say, who is Professor Ben, what would you say? He's an. It's so obvious, it's not obvious, right? He's an American, right? What else am I? Describe me.
I think you are a lot of
Italy, Italian. I do have.
Yeah, the same word.
Did I show this already? My Italian passport
Oh.
and my American passport. So I do have Italian passport. I never. Well, let me show everybody. Here's my Italian passport. Hi, Anais and Ella. And here's my American passport. Of course, I never use the Italian passport, so it doesn't have any kind of marks in it. But Italy does allow people to have Italian citizenship, even if they have American or Spanish or Korean citizenship under certain rules. Like, for example, specifically, I was born in 1962. My father came to the United States in 1960. So he became an American citizen in 1967. And because he became an American citizen after I was born, Italian law allows people like me to claim Italian citizenship. So, and the reason why I've been thinking a lot about what's called dual citizenship, dual means two, citizenship, is that I think in the fast disappearing hope for a peaceful resolution of the conflict in Ukraine, there has to be part of a constitutional restructuring of Ukraine, including requiring that Ukraine allow dual citizenship. Ukrainian government does not allow people in Ukraine to be both Ukrainian and Italian, or both Ukrainian and Spanish, or both Ukrainian and Mexican. No. And the reason they don't allow that is because they don't want people to be both Ukrainian and Russian. And I think if there's, and again, this is fast ending as a possibility because of the intensifying chaos, fear, hatred, and disgust among the mass population as more and more fighting and atrocities and occurs. Still, if there's going to be a peace arrangement for Ukraine, the Ukrainian government will have to allow Russian people in Ukraine to have both Ukrainian and Russian citizenship, so that they can vote in Ukrainian elections and they can vote in Russian elections, the way I vote in Italian elections. I vote in Italian elections here or when I'm in the US because the Italian government allows Italians outside of Italy to have representation in the Italian parliament. And that's not such a big conflict issue for Italians. Italy wants to encourage people like me to lobby the American government or even the Korean government to promote Italian foreign policy interests. But when I was in Bulgaria, the Bulgarian government allowed Bulgarian Turkish people who belong to the Turkish Muslim minority in Bulgaria to have dual citizenship. And there is a chapter in the book on Bulgaria. I think there's one reference to crimes that happened 40 years ago in Bulgaria at the end of communism, when the economic crisis in communist Bulgaria was becoming worse and worse and worse. And the communist government tried to appeal to Bulgarian patriotism to compensate, to maintain support for the government. And they engaged in what they call in Bulgarian, the word is izvrosительный process, which means the regeneration process. And what they attempted to do was to force Bulgarian Turkish people to become Christian and take a Christian name and erase their Bulgarian Turkish names. And claiming that Bulgarian Turks used to be Bulgarians, but under 500 years of Turkish enslavement, that's the term that they use, they teach Bulgarian children in schools, the Tursko-ropstvo, the Turkish enslavement, or the Turkish yoke. Under 500 years, they forced so many Bulgarians to become Muslims, and they forgot that they were Bulgarians. And so we're going to regenerate and revive Bulgaria by bringing back these poor Turkish minorities back to their primary identity as Bulgarians. And you have to do it, or we will hurt you. And Amnesty International said hundreds of people died. We don't really know how many people died, but Amnesty International said under this regeneration process, hundreds of people died. 300,000 Bulgarian Turks left Bulgaria and went to Turkey left communist Bulgaria with the assent of the Bulgarian communist government, and they went to Turkey. 300,000. Then in 1989, the communist government fell in Bulgaria, and about 200,000 came back. So there's still 100,000 Bulgarian Turks who live in Turkey, and they tend to concentrate in the suburb of Istanbul called Bursa. And they all have dual citizenship. The Bulgarian government gave those Bulgarian Turks, including the ones that came back to Bulgaria, and the Bulgarian Turks still living in Turkey, dual citizenship. So they gave them Bulgarian passport, and they have Turkish passport, and they can vote in Bulgarian elections. So Bulgarian politicians will actually go to Bursa, Turkey, and campaign for votes. And again, why am I referencing? Did you know this? Of course you did not know this. You didn't know this because Bulgaria has not had a civil war since 1989, 1990, unlike Yugoslavia, unlike Ukraine today. And that's an important theme that we want to highlight in this class and in critiquing the readings in the book, that the European Union does not get enough credit for its successes because its successes involve preventing bad things from happening. And when something does not happen, it's not in the news. If there's not a war in Bulgaria, you do not see headline in the newspaper, "No war in Bulgaria." No, it's a non-event. It's a success story. But the successes in preventing violence in the European Union, they do not get enough coverage. They do not get any media coverage. Only when the European Union is charged with or perceived as failing to prevent war in Bosnia 30 years ago, or preventing war from happening in Ukraine, only then is the European Union criticized and seen and portrayed as, oh, the European Union didn't work. But there are lots of cases where it did work, where the situation could have been violent and did not become violent. Like, for example, between Russian minority and in Latvia. Did you know Russians are like 30% of the population in Latvia and Estonia? Did you know that there's any conflict between Latvians and Russians or Estonians and Russians? No. And there was, and it could be a new potential for it after this war in Ukraine, but it's a success story, which means it's a non-event. And so it's not covered in the media, unless you read very deeply in the news report. So that's the point I want to emphasize in reading for this class, that is the situation between Spanish and Catalans bad? It's not good, but it could be much worse, given what happened under Franco under the Franco dictatorship. The Basque separatist fighting movement, they declared a ceasefire. How did that happen? Any explanation for that? Has to include European Union. Now, the chapter on Spain, the authors do not really want to talk about Basque nationalism, and they don't want to talk about Catalan nationalism. They don't really talk too much about it. And that's what they chose to do. Why? I don't know. But that's what they chose to do. But keep in mind, if people feel fear and insecurity, to any strategy for peace in Europe or peace anywhere has to include lessening this fear and suspicion as a source of escalating conflict also. And keeping in mind that people have a predisposition, maybe not you, Gloria, maybe not you, Sarah, yeah. Maybe not me, but generally speaking, human beings have a predisposition to behave and act nationalistic. They have a predisposition to become very concerned about their well-being and defense of groups of people they care very much about because they self-identify. So let's go back to my exercise. You describe me as an American, an Italian, what else? You don't really know, right? But what's more obvious? I'm a man, right? What else? I'm white, Caucasian. What else? You don't know. I'm Catholic. What else? I'm from Ohio, the state of Ohio in the US. I'm a professor. And you could go on and on and on and describe Professor Ben in terms of groups of people, bigger groups of people. Oh, let's not forget an important group. Divinity is my last name. Right? Some of these groups, these are groups of people, and I may or may not care much about. I really don't care too much about Ohio. I maybe a little bit. Like when Ohio football teams lose, I can become sad. Oh, Ohio lost. Oh, but that's a relatively low level of intensity of concern with the dignity and pride and prestige of Ohio. But if I'm a typical American, this group, I'm going to be very concerned about. I'm going to be very concerned about its defense. I'm also going to be very concerned about its prestige and dignity, because this is an important point I want to highlight. Human nature includes my desire to feel good about me. I want to like myself. I want to have a positive image about me. I want to have a positive image about myself. Secondly, I tend to self-identify with different in-groups, but with varying degrees of intensity of concern, right? With varying degrees of intensity of concern. I don't care so much about if you say Ohio sucks, I'm not gonna go, whoa. But if you make fun of my family, if you say something about my sister, I won't. I mean, I saw this when I was at the American University in Bulgaria. I guess the best way to insult an Albanian, and this is, I think, common throughout the Muslim world, is to say something about the virtue of that person, that man's sister. And it resulted in a fight, right? Insulting my family. Insulting white people, or insulting, making fun of the Pope, I might not care too much about it. But of course, many people in Catalonia care about Catalonia, and they also care about Spain. They might care more about Catalonia than they care about Spain. And often you really don't know. People themselves don't know how important some groups are relative to other groups. How much are you willing to sacrifice for Ukraine? How much are you willing to sacrifice for independence and sovereignty, for self-determination for Catalonia? Are you willing to sacrifice your job? Are you willing to, this tells you how intense people's love and self-identification with Ukraine or Catalonia or Italy or Israel or America is. What are they willing to sacrifice for it if they have to make a choice between, for example, reported this morning, 20,000 people have come into Ukraine to fight in the war against the Russians. They're people who are Ukrainians living in Britain for many years, for example, or professors, truck drivers, soldiers. They made a life in Great Britain. They moved to Britain 10, 20 more years ago. And now Ukraine is under invasion, is under attack. And they gave up their lives, their careers, their jobs in Britain to go to Ukraine and fight. That tells you that those people are Ukrainian nationalists, because they're willing to sacrifice their career and risk their lives. So, and that's the big challenge for peace in Europe and in the world. It's not the only source of violence and war, but nationalism and the desire for the well-being and defense and independence of my nation. And my nation is my biggest and most important self-identity community. It's my biggest and most intense self-identity group, right? This is very important too. It's my family, but this is small. Dementia is several people. In America, that's 330 million. In China, it's 1.3 billion. In Iceland, it's 300,000. Pretty small. But Icelandic nationalism exists, and Chinese nationalism exists, just like American nationalism exists. And there are many Catalonians who feel first Catalonia, and Catalonia must have its own state. Because think about how cool it is to have your own state. Aside from defending yourselves, if you have a state, you're one of 200 states in the world. That means, at least legally, not in reality, legally, Catalonia, Spain, if Catalonia became independent, Catalonia would be equal to Spain, it would be legally equal with Iceland, it would be legally equal with China, it would be legally equal with the United States, with Germany, with France, and it would be part of the international community of nation states. And that, if you're Catalan, you say, you're darn right, we deserve it. We have a glorious ancient history. We conquered Sardinia and Greece. We have a golden age. We have the right to a state today. And this is what Ukrainian nationalists say. We're not Russians. We're not little Russians. Malorusky, that was the Russian term for Ukrainians. We're Ukrainians, and we were great and glorious in the past. Or if you're a Kurd and you don't have your own sovereign state, you want your own sovereign state, and you're willing to fight for it, both for defense of your people from being erased, the way Bulgarians tried to erase Bulgarian Turks. The Turkish government until the 1980s denied that there was such a thing as Kurds. They called the Kurds in Turkey Mountain Turks. And just again, there's this learning among these groups of people in regions of Europe, including in the Balkans. They said the same thing. Kurds were Turks who went up into the mountains and they forgot that they were Turks. So we're going to uplift them to a higher civilizational level by allowing them to become Turks. Very insulting, right? But that's the kind of language that Turkish nationalists use, or Bulgarian nationalists regarding Bulgarian Turks. So this is the challenge of nationalism, but I want to make sure that you feel comfortable being here. So, you know, when I was home in the US, it was the first time in a couple of years because of the pandemic, couldn't really travel. So I was home and I came back just a little bit over 2 weeks ago, and I stopped at the famous chocolate factory close to my home, next to the airport where I fly from, Fannie Mae. This is world famous chocolate. At least it's famous in the United States because Oprah Winfrey likes this chocolate. You know who Oprah Winfrey is? So I want you, please, to enjoy this chocolate. And you can take the other two. Okay. And please, please eat them, because I would like to eat them, but if I do, you know, when you get to be my age, it's a lot easier to put on too much calories than when you're younger. But I'm gonna watch that. I'm gonna look at that for the whole class. No, I will not eat any, and I will save it for each class until it all goes away, disappears until you all eat it. Okay, so yeah, let me show Anais and Ella what they have to look forward to. I don't want to drop it. See the chocolate, Anais, Ella. So when you come to class, when our next class on Monday, Anais and Ella, you'll get some of this chocolate. Okay, so all right, but before we forget, we should do the attendance, the smart attendance, and hopefully I will figure out the computer for the next class so we can use the classroom computer. So let me go to, I have to open it up anyway, right? And so we go to the classroom here, we go to Cyber Campus, and then we'll go to the smart attendance for this class. Log in here, and we go to European Politics and Society, attendance, and that we're in week 2 here. Smart attendance, and your smart attendance number is 902. So let me go to the chat function. What's going on here? Didn't it already? Yeah, 902, like that. Okay, so there's your smart attendance number, everybody, 902. And okay, so that's out of the way. So then let me then go to the notes and that I have to open up here. Make sure I share screen. So we share screen just to show you all the notes I have, all the files I have saved on this computer. And I also wanted to get the students excited about this class. So we don't have any Korean students in the class, but the European Union has been admired and looked to as an example for peace building in other parts of the world. So the African Union, which came into being, I think, in this century, 21st century, out of the reform of the Organization of African States, very explicitly borrowed from the European Union experience to do something similar for Africa as a way by which to try to promote peaceful conflict resolution in Africa. And of course, Africa has also, particularly in the late 20th and early 21st century, has experienced terrible violence in different places. So the African Union is involved, for good or bad, in various military so-called peacekeeping operations or fighting terrorism operations, so-called terrorist operations in other parts of Africa, like in Somalia and elsewhere. But there's also been some discussion about having an East Asian Union, like the European Union, an East Asian Union. So here we see, let me show you here as we open up these files and go to screen share again. You can see, I think I have some links here to this person. There you see a former prime minister of Japan kneeling. His name is Yukio Hatoyama. And Yukio Hatoyama was prime minister of Japan some years ago. And here you see him kneeling, asking for forgiveness for crimes that Japan committed, Japanese forces committed against Korea during the Japanese occupation of Korea. And he also goes to China and falls on his knees, again, not while he's prime minister, after he's a former prime minister, going to China and asking for forgiveness. He has been one of the big promoters of this notion of creating an East Asian Union, again, very much on the model of the European Union. And this proposal for an East Asian Union has been raised over the years by Koreans as well as Japanese, and even Chinese commentators and observers have made reference to an East Asian Union. You can see here, but this goes back to, let me see if I can find that, go back to that, let me make sure that you can see this, share screen. Well, here's some definitions, right? A nation state. A nation state is a state in which the overwhelming majority of citizens show their self-identification with the territorial community within the state, the borders of the state, through favoring it more than any other group or community. And favoring refers to behavior by sacrifice of values on behalf of the community. So Europe is dominated by nation states. In other words, the overwhelming majority of people, say, living in Poland, feel most intensely Polish. 95% of the people who live in Poland speak Polish, are Catholic religion. Are you both Catholic? I shouldn't ask, it's not my business, right? I'm Catholic too. We're here at the Catholic University of Korea. So Poland is pretty much close to being an ideal, typical nation state in terms of a concept that Max Weber, the old sociologist of 100 years ago, it's an ideal, typical vision. No country is a perfect nation state, but countries that come closest to meeting the idea of which everybody living within the borders of the state identifies with the same in-group, and that in-group corresponds with the territory boundaries of the state. That's a nation state. But there are other places where you have much of the population identifying at first intensity, not with the state they live in, but with another community. It might be for some people in Catalonia, for Catalonia, not with Spain. Or some people in Ukraine may feel, well, we live in Ukraine, but we're really Russian. I don't feel like a Ukrainian. A lot of people obviously do feel like Ukrainians, the ones that are fighting and killing and dying against the Russian invasion. And that's the tragedy, right? When you have a mismatch, but that's just a fact of the world. Borders were drawn before national self-determination was the dominant factor determining where borders would be. So other examples of, of course, Poland became a nation state through great tragedy, right? Through World War II, mass slaughter of non-Polish people in the Holocaust and elsewhere. The mass, and this is important for what I'm afraid is going to happen again for Ukraine, mass population expulsions, mass population movements. I think I highlighted that on a class online, that there is precedent for solving conflict between Greeks and Turks over territory that, no, that's Greek territory, no, it's Turkish territory. That's one way by which to resolve the conflict once and for all is to force people to move. And typically that's horrible. But there's precedent for that in Europe in the 1920s between Greece and Turkey, exchanging, quote unquote, their populations. You can just imagine people abandoning their villages, their homes, their lands that they had in their family for centuries, and being forced to leave. When I was in Bulgaria, I went to Turkey in 1997, I think in the spring. Somebody drove a car. We went through eastern part of Turkey in Antalya, where the Ukrainians and Russians and Turkish government are now having a meeting to try to come up with some kind of ceasefire, which Antalya, big vacation place in Europe. And you see all these ancient Greek monuments all over the place, and there are no Greeks. But I went to one town, Kash, and Kash is the hometown of Santa Claus, St. Nicholas. Was Greek, a Greek saint, and about, maybe, I don't know, a mile, like 1.5 kilometers from the coast in this beautiful area with all these ancient Greek monuments and ruins, there's an island just like 1 or 2 miles away across. You see it with the lights, you can see the lights at night and everything. Obviously, it's real close, and they're all Greeks there. That's a Greek island. So the people fled Turkey in the 20s, and a lot of them went to different places, including they just ran across the water 1 or 2 kilometers to that island. And they could see every day the lands they lost, the houses they lost. So, and a lot of those Greeks went to the US, Australia, Canada, Europe. A lot went to Greece, obviously, and populated this town, the cities in Greece, including Thessalonica, the second biggest city in Greece, populated mainly with Greeks who were expelled from or fled Turkey. And then, that was agreed to in an international treaty. That's the Treaty of Lausanne I mentioned in class, right? And then Stalin, according to research I've seen, Stalin brought that up in the 1940s when they were planning how are they going to resolve these conflicts between Polish people, and Ukrainian people, and German people. He mentioned that in negotiations with Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt and Harry S. Truman, presidents of the United States during World War II, that, well, we did this in the 20s, maybe we should do it now. And they refused to agree. But then after the war happened, again, massive population movements. And I'm afraid that that's going to be the maximal outcome of this violence in Turkey, that they're going to partition Ukraine. Not violence in Turkey, violence in Ukraine. They're going to partition Ukraine the way they de facto partitioned Bosnia. And it's going to involve population. I mean, there's already 2.5 million Ukrainians that left Ukraine. They're going to Poland and elsewhere. But there's precedent for that. That's what I'm saying. Bloody, vicious, horrible, but legal precedent. The Treaty of Lausanne and then the war between Turkey and Greece after World War I. And so Europe was dominated by nation states, and nation states include the big founding countries as well as the small ones of the European, what is today the European Union, France and Germany, at least Western Germany, and Italy as well, along with Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. A nationalist is an individual who sees him or herself as a member of a large group of people who constitute a community that is entitled to independent statehood and who's willing to grant that community a primary and the primary terminal loyalty. So you can have American nationalists, German nationalists, Chinese nationalists, Catalonian nationalists, Kurdish nationalists. Nationalism characterizes a community when the modal politically attentive citizen is a nationalist. So the reason why nationalism characterizes this community is because nationalists, they really feel intensely motivated in their political views, political perceptions, and political behavior. Nationalism is the most powerful force changing international relations. It breaks up empires, it breaks up states. It's breaking up Ukraine right now. And including conflicting nationalisms. And it's because people are really intensely motivated. Like, I don't know how strongly you feel about Catalonian nationalism, but there are a lot of people, I mean, obviously someone like Puigdemont feels very strongly about it. To give up his home, he can't go back to Spain or he's going to go to jail, right? I mean, you're sacrificing a lot to do that. And he's not just doing it for himself. He feels that there are lots of people in Catalonia who feel the same way. And he has to fight for them, represent them. It's a small piece of evidence to remind us, even in Europe, the power of nationalism. And so a community acts nationalistically when number two is true. Modal doesn't mean majority. You know, so see the term modal here? Modal doesn't mean majority, it means the most typical person, the most typical citizen. So even though, for example, Ukrainian nationalists may not be a majority of the Ukrainian population, but those people are intensely motivated. They will fight and die and kill for Ukraine. They tend to be concentrated in Western Ukraine, in Lviv. And so they're so motivated and so intense that they tend to dominate the political system because they know what they want. Right? Where the rest of us, you know, we don't feel so intensely motivated by, I want money, I want wealth, I want human rights, I want self-expression, I want creativity. Yeah, that's great. But nationalists, they dominate Russian politics and they dominate Ukrainian politics today. And so a community acts nationalistically when number two is true with regard to a particular community. So what do I mean when I say Greeks act nationalistically or Chinese are nationalistic. What does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. Let me call up another slide here. And I have to wait for PowerPoint to open up here, so make sure that you can really see that. Share screen. So when I say a country acts nationalistically, what do we mean by that? I'll tell you. Nation states and core communities aspiring to nationhood, including maybe Catalan nationalists, Ukrainian nationalists, but also Germany, China, Poland, Japan, United States, they're all nation states. They will show a stronger inclination to see a threat from others and a greater tendency to see the threatener in stereotypical terms, highly simplistic terms, which show a high degree of simplification. So your adversary is not just your adversary is an enemy. Your adversary is evil. The threatener is not just an opponent, they're the devil. Yeah, nationalism associates with emotion. Nationalism associates with stereotyping. You cannot explain politics unless you incorporate emotion into politics. I love Ukraine. I love America. I love Italy. I love Catalonia. I love Spain. And I hate the opponents of my Catalonia freedom. I hate them. I mean, love and hate, disgust, these are all part of nationalism. A greater likelihood exists that the leaders of a nation state will advance and consider seriously the option to expand state influence at the expense of other actors. So keep in mind, a state for a nation in which everybody feels that they belong to the same nation will be perceived in the form of the government. The government will represent the state, and the people living in that nation state will tend to assume, collectively speaking, that the president or prime minister or leader of that nation state represents who they are. So if the state of France does well in the world, I feel good because I'm French. If Russia is respected, I feel good because I'm a Russian and I want Russia to be respected. And if Russia is humiliated or threatened, I'm going to get upset. If America loses a war, we lost in Afghanistan. Oh, we don't lose. Only the bad people lose. The good people win, right? How could we lose? Biden, it's his fault. Right after the loss in Afghanistan, President Joe Biden's approval ratings went from here to here, and they've not recovered. After 20 years, we just run away. After 3,000 American dead soldiers, God knows how many Afghans, after hundreds of billions of dollars spent, after tens of thousands of wounded, we just run away. After 20 years, Biden said we had no choice. So, and also the other side of the same coin is, if I expand China's influence, if I expand France's influence, if I expand Russia's influence at the expense of somebody else, there's going to be a lot of Americans or Russians or Chinese who are going to feel good about that. A greater tendency will exist among the publics of nation states to show a motivation of preoccupation with the objective of ingathering communities. This is called irredentism. That it comes from Benito Mussolini. I think I mentioned in another class, right? Italia irredenta. Those parts of the Italian nation that are unredeemed because they're controlled by the bad Greeks and the inferior Croats and the backward Slovenes. How dare they rule over Italian people and Italian territory? We must redeem those parts of the Italian nation by uniting them with the motherland or the fatherland, whatever you want to call it. Sound familiar with what Putin is doing in Ukraine? Or what China is demanding regarding Taiwan? Or what even South Korea is concerned about unifying with North Korea? The people and nation states will display a greater concern with maintaining faith and dignity, as represented by their government, representing their state, and the success or failure of the government foreign policy. They will show a greater willingness to take action to rectify an insult that they perceive to the state of the nation in international relations. This is, again, the challenge the European Union faces after 2 world wars. Oh, I'll post this on the cyber campus, of course. The public of a nation state will show a greater likelihood to be susceptible to grandeur interests, national grandeur, just beating up another enemy adversary for the sake of beating them up. We will defeat them on the battlefield. Perhaps the best example of a speech recognizing this national grandeur motivation was Hitler's speech after Germany defeated France in a short period of time at the beginning of World War II. National grandeur. In order to enhance the power of the state, effective appeals by state leaders to the citizenry to make sacrifices may occur, and leaders of nation states will show a greater effectiveness in their appeals in this regard. So this is part of, and part of this, of course, is that these sacrifices include a willingness on the part of the citizenry to become part of the armed forces. So nation state armies tend to fight better than non-nation state armies. Armies, militaries of nation states, whether it be Russia or Japan or the United States, they fight better than armies like the Soviet Union. During the beginning of World War II, the Soviet army basically just collapsed in front of the German army. Because it was not the Russian army, it was the Red Army of the Soviet Union. And Stalin, in his desperation, began then appealing to the soldiers. Okay, you're not fighting for communism, you're not fighting for Marxism, you're fighting for Russia, Mother Russia. Fight for Mother Russia. Like we have done for 1,000 years against the Germans, for 1,000 years, fight to save Mother Russia from the Germans. Oh yeah, I know what that is, if I'm a Russian soldier. Okay, we're not fighting for the Soviet Union, we're fighting for Russia. And that may have doomed the Soviet Union in World War II, because they never really got over that. They denied that they were nationalists, the communists denied, they erased nationalism, and then Stalin, in the midst of the desperation of World War II, began appealing to Russian nationalism to motivate the Soviet military to resist. And this isn't just about fighting war. I mean, I told you when I was in Bulgaria, I was there from 1994. Bulgaria was trying to carry out reforms, and the Bulgarian leadership under Ivan Kostel was the leader of the Union of Democratic Forces. He was the prime minister. During political campaigns, he came to the town where I was at in Bulgaria and gave a campaign speech. And I can understand Bulgarian because I studied Slavic languages. And he appealed to the Bulgarian people, please support me in our radical reform program, because they had to revolutionize former communist Bulgaria. They had to change everything. They had to change their economy. They had to change the policies for the economy, for social welfare, for the justice system. They had to rebuild everything from the very ground, from the very basic level. Like Bulgarians, it wasn't like what the Germans and the Japanese faced in 1945. When 1945 came and the war ended, there were still German bankers and German industrialists and German banks. They knew how to run an economy and a capitalist economy. In Bulgaria or in Poland, when I was there, not to mention the Soviet Union, people didn't know how to do the most basic undertake the most basic kind of procedures and policies to build a modern capitalist economy. Not to mention a modern capitalist, a modern democratic system with a autonomous, effective court system. This all had to be done from the bottom up. And one of the ways by which Bulgaria, the European Union, is a peace strategy was that the European Union offered to Poland, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Hungary, you want to know what you have to do to reform? We'll tell you what you have to do to reform. Here is 100,000 pages in English, all of the laws and policies adopted by the European Union since it began back at least in 1952 as the European Coal and Steel Commission. You have to implement all of these laws that we've adopted since 1952 into your Bulgarian, Polish, Hungarian, Czech, Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian policies and laws. I know it's hard, but this is what you have to do. And if you do this, you will make your country a modern, European, democratic, prosperous society. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be very, very difficult because after 50 years of communism, 40, 50 years of communism, it made a big impact, obviously in Bulgaria, Poland, the Czech Republic. It affected people's expectations. And you have to change their expectations about how the world works. Well, I think I was telling you this online, right? Last class about how I had to get medical treatment. And just, did I tell you this story? About how I had to get like a, oh, no, it was because it was the methodology class I was teaching, right? That I had to get a wart removed from my thumb. And so I went to a Bulgarian doctor and he had some strange ways of treating it, which we wouldn't do in the US, but I'm not going to go into that here. But then I tried to give him some money. And he was like, oh, I always remember, okay. But as a result of communism in Bulgaria, there was this just assumption that of course you don't pay for medical care. You don't pay for medical care. I mean, it's the government pays for that. You don't pay for that. But of course, the European Union was pushing Bulgaria and Poland and all these countries. You have to bring in material economic incentives and prices into your medical care system that really means something. So you have to start charging some money, you know. And so the point I'm trying to make is you have to change not only the policies and laws, you have to change people's thinking. Their fundamental assumptions, including their fundamental assumption about what is right and wrong, that they don't have even thought about before. In the European Union, the name for this collection of policies, all of the policies that have been adopted since 1952 is a French term. It's a key communautaire. Which means it's been translated into English as the community patrimony. This is all the collection of laws that have been adopted that anyone who wants to join the European Union has to agree to incorporate into all of their laws in what are called 35 chapters. In negotiation, for example, Ukraine has applied to join the European Union. Turkey's applied to join the European Union. The European Commission negotiates with all of these countries that apply to join the European Union. And there are 35 so-called chapters, like chapters in the book, that cover education policy, medical care policy, economic, everything. And Ivan Kostov came to Blagoevgrad, Bulgaria, and spoke to the voters in Blagoevgrad, Bulgaria, and said, we have to do this to make our country a European country. We have to do these terribly difficult, complicated reforms in order to return to Europe. That was the terminology 30 years ago. We have to do these changes to become European, to return to Europe. And Europe means the Western, prosperous, peaceful. Yes?
Just a question, because what you just said remind me. Thank you. Just a question, because what you just said remind me of the chapter we had to read for today. And one of the pages were talking about the fact that nationalism in some countries who joined the European Union began to overcome the hierarchical rule, I don't know how to say it, of the European Union. So sometimes countries who entered the European Union were not that liberal about their rule and not that progressist, as for Poland.
Things have changed.
And Ukraine also.
Yeah.
So how about the fact that some of them, their country are against gay people, abortion, or all the progressist rule and ultra progressist and liberal kind of way of thinking that pro-European country are all about?
Oh, excellent question. Please have more chocolate. Is a reward for an excellent question. Viktor Orban is the Prime Minister of Hungary, and there's not a chapter on Hungary in the book. There's a chapter on Poland and Bulgaria. But Viktor Orban has been criticized as this anti-democratic, or what he calls specifically an illiberal democracy. And Viktor Orban is my age, so I remember him being a younger man, and he had been a dissident who fought against communism and led the struggle against the communist regime. And he talked at the time about human rights and democracy. And then he, like many politicians, like not all, but many politicians, they like power more than they like ideology. And he reflects, like in Donald Trump in the United States and elsewhere, this rising resentment among elements of society against the impact of global economic capitalist integration. There's more and more conflict within the peoples of particularly nation states, including nation states, between those people who love globalization, like you. You're taking this class with me. That means your English is pretty good, maybe excellent, and you're studying Korean language. Think about it. You know English and you know Spanish. No, you know Catalan.
No, I'm not all about Catalan. I don't identify myself. I identify myself to Sardinian people.
Okay.
It's Italian.
So you speak Italian and Sardinian?
I want to learn, but I had a fight with my dad when I was younger, so I didn't learn with him. But he can speak.
So what language do you speak in Sardinia?
And in Sardinia, we speak the dialect.
Okay.
And also Italian.
Okay.
We don't speak Spain. Like Catalonia is, nationalism in Sardinia.
Okay, so you gotta remember you're from Sardinia. You're the first person from Sardinia ever. I mean, I know Silvio Berlusconi's got had a big mansion there. He would have a lot of parties in it. But think about it. You speak Italian and English and Sardinian and you're learning Korean. You speak Spanish and English. You know 2 world languages, and you're studying Korean too. These are, globalism, what the point I'm trying to make. And you're young, and you're smart, and you're studying here in South Korea, and the credits will transfer back to university. Globalization for you is a great thing. You know more than one language. And know another language really, really well. That is so important. So yes, you probably have an international career. You'll work in different environments. If you go back to Mexico, you'll be traveling probably all over the place as part of your job at some point. So globalization is great for you. But there are a lot of people in Mexico, or a lot of people in the United States that are not equipped, are not trained, are not educated for whatever reason, including just not being able to benefit from to exploit and benefit the most from globalization. And they see the world in Poland and in Hungary and also in America, a world in which 1/3 or 40% or of the society is doing well with globalization, and another third or 40% that sees themselves becoming outdated and backward and obsolete compared to a world where they see more and more people living in their country that are not Hungarians, that are not Polish people, who are doing jobs that Polish people used to do, that require that the government use other languages besides English in America, or see literature from the government in Spanish, because Hispanic population is the biggest minority in the United States, who see people that don't look like them, that have different cultures, and in combination with the fact that unless you know high skill languages and capabilities, your ability to benefit from globalization is becoming less and less and less. And you see that while your father or mother or grandfather or grandmother in the United States or Poland or Hungary, they were considered to be relatively equal with everyone else, even if they weren't in reality, it becomes too obvious, right? That so much of the Polish population is just making enough to survive. Not to mention save money to buy a house, buy an apartment. If you want to buy an apartment in Poland, you're going to have to make a lot of money, and you're probably going to be very attracted to making that money in an international career. Whether working internationally or working for a company that wants you to be able to speak German or Italian if you want a good paycheck. So you understand what I'm getting to. There's more and more polarization in these societies, including this resentment among the mass of the population that was promised, or they were told that if we join the European Union, we'll become Europeans. In other words, we'll live like Italians, Germans, and French. And they're not living like Italians and Germans and French. And they see 1/3 of society living like Italians and Germans and French, but 1/2 of society is not. And 1989 becomes 1999, then becomes 2009, then becomes 2019, and 30 years later, yeah, 1/3 of the population, we love Europe, we love European Union, we love European integration, we love tolerance, we love multilingual culture. I met gay people. I'm not afraid of gay people. I don't need the Catholic Church to tell me how I should behave. And then you have the 1/3 of the population that is becoming more and more resentful about being left behind. And that's not just in Hungary and Poland, it's the United States, it's Donald Trump. It's Boris Johnson and the British voters, not only, but predominantly working class white voters voted for Boris Johnson, living in the urban working class areas of Britain and the cities. Almost 1 million Polish people went to live and work in Ukraine and the United Kingdom since communism fell. Up to 1 million out of a country of 60 million. You see Polish people everywhere. You see Polish newspapers in the stores. You see Polish people acting in ways that English people don't act like. You see, and if people act in a criminal way or in a way that is against social norms, if you're English, you say, well, that's what English people do. But if it's a Polish person in England that acts that way, that gets drunk and gets in a fight, the foreigner, look what that bad foreigner is doing. All these Polish people are so violent. You exaggerate because you notice that person is not English, or that person is not a white American, or that person is not your standard typical assumption about what a British person is, or the standard typical unspoken assumption of what an American is. And Viktor Orban, like many politicians, they respond to changing attitudes and values. But what I want to emphasize or mention here is that this power of nationalism in Bulgaria and in Poland was being harnessed or used to persuade Bulgarian people and Polish people to accept the economic shocks that the Bulgarian government, the new democratic Bulgarian government, or the young democratic Bulgarian government would have to implement, and saying, you should accept this because we need to make Bulgaria European again. We need to build a better Bulgaria for our young people, for future generations. So nationalism is also can associate not just with fascism. Nationalism can associate with other ideologies, including liberal, pro-reform, democratic and capitalist ideologies, like Polish nationalism and Hungarian nationalism did in fighting communism. Who were the enemies of the communists? The democratic West. So if you're Viktor Orban in 1989, you're saying democracy, freedom, we want elections, we want the right to own property, yay, yay, yay. Because your enemy is communist government that's totalitarian and socialist. But that was 30 years ago. So the point I'm trying to make is that the European Union faces a dilemma. A dilemma doesn't mean it's not solvable, but a dilemma is a challenge because the European Union needs the political capacity to mobilize the political resources and the material resources to achieve its objectives, like creating a single market. But it requires strong, effective states to carry out these changes to reform the economy and reform the laws that support the economy. And that means appealing to people to support those changes, those policies, to be, quote, good Polish people, to be good Hungarians, to be good Germans, to be good Italians. That even as nationalism is a challenge, it's also a resource, because nationalism can mobilize people to do difficult tasks that take tremendous effort and focus, like transforming these Stalinist communist systems to Italian or French or German type systems. And it's not just the communist countries. I mean, the first places we saw where the European Union played an important role in carrying out democratization, encouraging non-democratic countries to become democratic, was Spain, Portugal, and Greece. When Franco was dictator, he died in 1975. At the same time, Portugal was under Salazar, which was also a Franco-type regime, and Greece was under the control of a military dictatorship until 1974. And the European Union, and what was the European community at the time, was directed to orient those young countries, those young democracies, to strengthen their young democracies, to prevent chaos, to prevent fighting, and to encourage those countries to establish more secure democratic and economic conditions in those countries that have been dictatorships, in the case of Spain, for what, 40 years, from 1930s to the 1970s. That's a long time, right? And keep in mind, this is happening during the Cold War, because the dominant view in Washington, in the United States, as the leader of Western European military NATO alliance, was that the the Soviet Union, Russia, the Soviet Union, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, was an imperialist, dangerous power. That basically the Soviet Union was the Russian version of Hitler's Germany. And the desire to stabilize these young democracies in Greece, in particular, but also in Spain and Portugal, was within that Cold War context that Greece has a border with Bulgaria. Greece is on the front line with the communist countries that were in the 1980s. And the Americans, maybe not so much the Europeans, believe that the Soviet Union wanted, the dominant view in the United States was that the Soviet Union wanted to dominate and control the world, starting with Europe, right? Focusing on Europe, I should say. And so this desire to strengthen and stabilize these young democracies was seen within that context. So that's going to, and that's very relevant for the chapter on Greece that you read. Greece was not ready to join the European Union, or what the European Community, as it was called in 1984. But Greece was brought in because they thought it would stabilize the young democratic government in Greece, the young democratic regime in Greece, even though economically it was not prepared. The European Commission said Greece has not carried out the economic reforms it needs to carry out yet. And the other members, the states of the European Community at the time, decided to bring it in anyway, because they wanted to stabilize this post-military young democratic regime. Bulgaria joined in 2007, so 15 years ago. Bulgaria was not ready economically to join the European Union. The European Commission said it wasn't ready, but the member states of the European Union, because they changed their name in 1992 to the European Union decided to bring in Bulgaria because they were considered rising Russian influence in Bulgaria. So this international relations environment has always been very important for shaping Europeanization and the impact of the European Union on the member states. And it's doing that today as well. I mean, Ukraine applied last week to join the European Union, obviously because it views the European Union as the opposition to Russian influence and Russian domination of Ukraine. So, and to conclude on terms of nationalistic behavior here, what is national behavior? I already said the commitment of the military to the defense of the state will be more intense in the nation state. And this is important, for example, Joe Biden today and any leader of a nation state. And it's also true for Vladimir Putin in leading the Russian nation state. The citizenry of a nation state will demonstrate a greater likelihood to grant state leaders a greater decisional latitude in defending state interests. So if George W. Bush, on September 11, 2001, the United States was attacked by militant Islamists and hijacking planes and crashing them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, trying to crash them into the White House, but that was crashed into the ground before it could reach Washington. And he declares in a speech to the American people a few days later, we will go to Afghanistan and we will invade Afghanistan and hunt down the terrorists that have carried out this crime. Osama bin Laden and the terrorists that carried out this crime. And the American people went, yeah, we go to war into Afghanistan. And George Bush, who was mocked, made fun of in the media, until that time, he became a war leader of the American nation, and his public opinion approval ratings were really high. And then George W. Bush said, with the advice of his cabinet and leaders, and you know what? We need to invade Iraq too, to get rid of Saddam Hussein. And even though there wasn't really evidence that Saddam Hussein had anything to do with the September 11, 2001 attacks in the West. But the American people went, yeah, it's a war. And they gave him the benefit of the doubt. So the citizenry of a nation state will give the leaders of a nation state the benefit of the doubt to do what they want to do, what they say they have to do to defend Russia or America or France or China. But at the same time, public opinion in America or Russia or China is going to punish a leader who appears to be responsible for defeat or for a loss of face. So Joe Biden is blamed for that humiliation in Afghanistan, even though he claims, of course, that he was inheriting a situation that Donald Trump negotiated. He negotiated with Donald Trump in 2020, early 2020, to begin to leave Afghanistan. But it's humiliating. We don't lose wars, right? It's difficult to get out of Afghanistan. It's difficult, and that's why many people say, observers say, that Vladimir Putin, no Russian government will give up Crimea. Crimea is to Russian nationalism what, I don't know enough about Catalan nationalism.
You can say Corsica is to France, because in France they stole the Corsica territory. Yeah.
Italian nationalism. Yeah, my family's Italian. My father passed away recently, but I still have two aunts in Rome that I'd like to go see soon. But there was one American news report from the Associated Press that said it reminded the American readers of the newspapers that, I don't know how Mexicans talk about the Alamo.
No.
Santa Cruz and the Alamo.
Oh.
In America, the Alamo is this romantic ideal. This is all stereotypes, but the author of that Associated Press report said, for Russians, Crimea is what the Alamo is to Americans. And it can't give it up, right? And so again, it's going to be extremely difficult for Putin to get out of Ukraine. You know, for him to get out of Ukraine, it probably means he's going to lose. He'll have to be overthrown before the Russian government will agree to withdraw from Ukraine. What will he do to prevent from being overthrown? How much more violence will there be? So that's the context for understanding European integration in dealing with obviously very nationalistic France, for example. There's a chapter in the book on France and de Gaulle and his role as a great French living symbol of French nationalism. So, how much time is left? We should go to the debate. And
We also have votes to do.
vote?
Yeah, votes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but the most important is to give you all the chance to practice your English. And so let's go to the cyber campus and go to vote and make sure you can see that. So make sure we do the share screen.
I just have a question about the PowerPoint you're showing.
Uh-huh.
It is like your notes about the 7 chapters you have to read, or is it like your continuing reading notes?
Yeah, the notes. Of course, you see that the kind of grading we do here is based upon what's called subjective grading. So you write a little 150-word paragraphs. You write a take-home midterm paper of 500 words, and you have a final exam of 500 words, final paper of 500 words. So it's more use and application of the information in the reading. And the fact that I wrote it out, rewrote the chapter in my own words, along with my commentary in electronic format, hopefully will help you use the information that you want as you write your paragraphs and as you write your midterm and final paper.
So our exams are on all the material you gave us, but we have to rephrase it on our mind.
In the midterm, I will ask you to use and cite information from at least 3 different chapters in the first half of the book to come up with a response to a question that I haven't developed yet, because I'll do that. I'll probably do that next week or week after. I'll come up with the first, and then you will submit the midterm paper to me. I write comments on it and send it back to you, and you rewrite it and revise it, and then you're also going to talk with me about it. So, you know, I can go through the notes. It's just I'm afraid that if I start going over the notes, people are going to go, oh.
No, I'm just asking about because that's the first time I do an exchange, and in Belgium it's kind of different. We don't have a midterm exam, so I was wondering if we were going to talk about it like later, about the procedures or.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, to try to do everything in one class, it would be so boring. But yeah. I mean, like responding now to your question about what we're going to do in the class, we're going to do what I begin to talk about that, and to use the readings to prepare these paragraphs, which are preparation. You know what? I forgot to bring the paper that I noted which side you were on the debate topic. So here's the debate topic. To South Koreans, oh yeah, that's the debate topic. So to South Koreans, I think you can all see that, right? To South Koreans, European national governments remain generally more important for foreign policy of Mexico or South Korea or any country than the European Union institutions. And so I wanted to divide you up into groups, and I will, since I didn't write down, well, I didn't bring the paper with me. Did I? No, I didn't bring the paper where I wrote down who was pro and who was con on that topic. If I let you assign yourself to the group, so I'll create two groups, and so room 1 will be pro, and room 2 will be con. And so, based upon your position, pro or con, on your paragraphs that you submitted, please join pro or con. So you're supposed to assign yourself to pro or con. I think, as I remember, 2 people were pro and 2 people were con on the debate topic. So if you remember your debate, please join pro and con. So let me go ahead. So please join Ella, Anais, Sarah, and Gloria. Please join either the pro or the con group on the debate topic. And so on the debate topic here, to South Koreans, European national governments remain generally more important for Seoul's foreign policy aims than the European Union institutions, okay? So please join pro or con. So one person, well, let me see, go back to the breakout rooms. So Anais is joined pro. Gloria, are you pro or con?
I'm con.
Okay, so join con. Sarah, are you pro or con?
Pro.
So join pro, please. And Ella, are you pro or con?
I'm con. How do I?
Okay, join con, please. Okay, join con. Okay. Typically, I bring the paper with me, and well, I do it in my office. But so please join the pro or con group based upon your pairs. Can you do that, please?
I mean, on the vote or on the.
No, just on the breakout room.
Oh, where?
On Zoom.
It's here. Oh, it's interesting. Section of small group.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so let's now, okay, so let me flip a coin, and who will speak first for pro? And heads, it will be Anais. Tails, it will be Sarah. And it's heads. So Anais will speak first for pro. So Anais, please give us your pro statement on the debate topic. Anais. Anais?
She asked me what were your arguments.
Yeah, Anais, what are your pro arguments? You wrote a pro paragraph, Anais. So you've thought about this topic. You know the English language expression of the topic. Could you please relay your paragraph information. You can even just read your paragraph to us here in the class now as the pro side, one of the pro arguments in the debate. Anais?
Maybe.
Are you muted, Anais? You want to unmute yourself so we can hear you? Anais? Sometimes we have technical issues here.
Yeah.
Is she there?
Yeah.
Okay, Anais, can you read your statement so we can hear you over the computer?
Oh.
I'm telling her that the teacher is coming. I don't think that she's right here.
Anais, can you hear me?
I think that, yeah, while she's in the breakout room, she.
Oh, that's right. I'll close. I'm sorry. All right. My fault. My fault. My fault. So we have to close the breakout rooms. Thank you. I forgot about that. So we have to wait for the breakout rooms to count down.
Oh, maybe she.
Anais, you can leave the pro. Okay. Okay, so Anais, can you read your statement, please? And unmute yourself.
Yes, sorry. So I was pro the statement because they said that on certain decisions, some countries had more power of persuasion than others. Also, sorry, I'm reading. Yeah, there has been a rise of anti-EU parties, and we have seen that the United Kingdom has voted to leave the European Union just a year ago. And so the growing tensions show that relations among the European Union changes versus if you have if a country has personal relations with a country, it will be more safe than within the European Union.
Yeah. Can you all hear her? Are your microphones working? Are your speakers working on your computers? Yeah. Okay, so you can hear it too, because my computer speaker is blown here, so it's not. I need to get a new computer, but it's going to cost me some money. Okay, so there you heard Anais' argument that Brexit, for example, shows that what the member state wants is what the European Union does. The European Union doesn't impose its will on the member states. And so let's hear now a con position, and heads will be Ella and tails will be Gloria. And it's tails to Gloria. Gloria, please give us your con statement on the debate question.
Okay, but I have to have the microphone.
Yeah, so, that's true. Okay, thank you.
So, I wrote that South Korean political administration, or more specifically, still foreign policies, more interested in horizontal European countries' way of sharing policies than an individual and vertical way of understanding political fields and national sovereignties. And then I multiply something that I found in the chapter 2. Thing that is important to not underestimate the importance of the European Union, which is still the pillar upon which they can build their identities. And that's a little different of what I wrote, but while we were talking about it in class, I also noticed that I think that war memory of people is kind of crap, because we see it with Ukraine. We seem to forget all the time the suffering and the time and the losses and the pain, and we do it all over again and we do it all over again. And even in Ukraine, we tend to reject Black people because we are in war, and we tend to reject minorities, so that creates more frustration and more hatred. And so I feel like national sovereignties aren't that close to deserve to reign upon European continent. And I know that sounds very dogmatic speech, but I don't care because I learned it. I am going to be a politician, and I know that people don't deserve to reign. I wasn't thinking like that like years ago, but now that I see how when people get frustrated, they tend to like join extreme political field, our right wings and left wings. And I'm in a feminist group in my university because I wanted to see by myself. I was curious, and these are beautiful people, but yeah, sometimes when we think we are doing the good, we're not.
Yeah.
And when we think we are doing the excellent, we are doing the worst. Yeah, and I think that because we think with too much emotion and not enough backup on the situation, and we think and we vote and we wonder about ourselves first, and that also remains on political voters and turnover. And yeah, so I think European Union is also kind of a sovereignty, and it also has its flaws. Like a lot of right wings are anti-European Union because they feel like European Union is stealing the voice of the people and so on. But we saw what the voice of the people like already did. With Hitler, with other people, but we are not every time in the right mind to take decision. And I know that's kind of hard to hear because I also want to do with around that. I also want to test it, but in Belgium it's impossible because we learned that in Belgium we have a lot of extreme ways of thinking, especially in the right wings, a lot of racism, and we don't talk about it. We don't talk about Congo. We don't talk about this thing. So we are not ready to reign. I'm sorry, I really think that.
Okay, and then you are, which side are you on? You are Sarah. Sarah, yes, Sarah. You're, you're pro.
Okay, you're pro. Well, I think that we know that European Union institutions, women that have a purpose in accordance with, I investigated that they have an article, number 13 of the Treaty of the European Union, that they promote also values and defend its interests of those citizens, and well, and also of the member states. And of course, maybe to push the advance to the significance of the European Union and initiatives so that the industries can investment into the Russian, and also to rise to purpose United Union, like legislation, I don't know how to pronounce it, legislation, and also because as the article say that we read by Christopher Burton, that the European Union institutions focus more to the economic situation of the countries, and also that the political areas like climate, environment, and health, and specifically focus on their peace and prosperity between the member states.
Okay, and we have now the next person to speak will be Ella.
Okay, cool. I heard the little last bit, my audio cut out there for a second. She said the member states have to be equal, was it? Or was I hearing that wrong?
I think yes.
Okay. So I guess my little thing to speak. Am I reading my essay or am I responding to Sarah?
You can do whatever you want.
Oh, okay. I might read my little essay then. So what I said was that basically it's more effective and more efficient to go to the EU instead of each individual little state in the EU, even though the EU requires powerful member states to be effective. That doesn't mean that you should go to each and every individual member state when you're trying to introduce foreign policies or foreign relations.
Good point. There's 27 member states. You know, at the very least, you know, it's necessary to talk to somebody who can communicate at least initially on behalf of everyone. Okay, and so we're getting short on time here, and so again, please vote on the debate topic then on the survey site for the class and the vote site, and I think that's everybody. And so this looks like it's a sign of a good debate because we're split among the class, which is good because obviously there's no right and wrong answer, no clearly right and wrong answer to this topic. It was meant to be provocative in general. So, well, I got to stop now because I got to go get set up for the next class at 11 o'clock. So, unless anybody has any questions, I'm going to close the meeting, and I'll look forward to seeing Ella and Anais at the next class. Okay. So, bye.